Hello everybody and welcome to Every Rock Has a Story. For today's story, I'm going to tell you about a material that you've all heard of, that you've certainly all seen. It's one of the smallest samples that I have, even though it comes in much bigger chunks than this. Let me bring it a little bit closer, and I've got another piece of this that I just found this morning that I can show you too. Let me start with this little bitty one up front. Kind of a light gray, not quite white, but a light gray color. It's got some fragments of other things in there you might be able to see. There's a little sort of an oval shaped thing right there. Not too heavy. I'll give you a hint. I found this in my garage, where my garage was crumbling a little bit on the ground. Here's a better piece that I found this morning. This was from a stone wall that was built near our house, and this was what was gluing the stone wall together. Again, gray with some little bits of other things in there. You can see on the back, yeah, see those other bits all glued together in this gray mass. There's a big crystal right there inside this gray mass. Do you know what this is? What do you think this is that was gluing my stone wall together and making the floor of my garage? This stuff is called cement. Cement. Actually, this is called concrete, but the main ingredient in concrete is cement, because cement is the stuff that glues it all together. Cement is one of the most important inventions in all of architecture and in all of the structures that have been built. The Romans, the great Roman Empire, were the first people to figure out how to make and to use cement to make even stronger structures, like the great domes and arches and aqueducts that the Romans built. Cement is a very valuable resource, but I want to tell you the story of this rock, this aggregate made of cement binding together all those other bits of gravel. Turns out that cement starts with another rock that you've seen before. It starts with our chalk rock. To make cement, you need to find a source of lime. Lime, not like the fruit on the tree, but lime, which is calcium oxide and sometimes calcium hydroxide. Anyway, you know that chalk rock is loaded with calcium, right? And what else? CO2. That's why it fizzed when we put our acid on it. Chalk rock is what you need. You take the chalk rock, if you want to make cement, you take the chalk rock, you grind it up, and then you have to heat it up or burn it in something called a kiln. You might have used a kiln to make pottery, for example. You put that ground up chalk rock in the kiln and you burn it, and all the CO2 goes away up into the sky, and the lime, the CaO lime, is left behind. And that lime is what you need to make cement. Lime plus a few other ingredients and processes that the Romans figured out and modern technologies figured out is what you need. So that means to make cement, which is in garages and stone walls and arches and chimneys and sidewalks and so many places that we see concrete bound together by cement, to make that cement and concrete, we have to burn limestone, which releases CO2 to the sky. And what happens when we release all that CO2 to the sky? It's like a blanket on the earth, warming up the earth. 10%, 1/10 of all the CO2 warming gases that people are putting into the sky comes from making cement out of chalk rock. The other name for chalk rock is limestone. In fact, there's another interesting sample that I have here that I've been waiting to show you. It's this one right here. Let me bring this one up close. Can you tell what that is? That's a seashell. That's a real seashell. I actually collected this on a beach in Australia where there were lots of these big, beautiful seashells there. Do you remember what I told you that our chalk rock limestone was made out of? It's made out of teeny tiny little skeletons from the tiniest little ocean organisms called plankton. Well, larger ocean organisms that make these big shells usually make their shells also out of calcium carbonate. And people who lived, for example, in the early colonies in Georgia and Florida, they found a lot of these shells, like oyster shells, and they found that they could grind these up and heat them to make lime out of shells, beach shells. Now, if I'm right that this shell is made out of the same calcium carbonate that our chalk rock is, what should be the case? How can we test the idea that this is a good way to make lime just like chalk rock is? Do the acid test. Let's try it. Let's see if this is really made out of calcium carbonate. So if we put this on, if it's really made of calcium carbonate, it should fizz. Let's watch and listen. It is, it's bubbling. See those bubbles? See the fizz? This shell is really made of calcium carbonate. It's made of the same thing that our chalk rock is. Half calcium, half CO2 gas. So those people in Georgia and Florida were right. They could gather up all their seashells and oyster shells, grind them up, burn them in the kiln, and they could make cement to build their structures. Cement. The story of cement starts with marine organisms, plankton, and seashells accumulating in thick piles of limestone, chalk rock. People making that discovery like the Romans, taking the limestone, heating it up in kilns to make lime powder, which is the main ingredient for cement, and the great concrete structures that we still have today. Sidewalks, walls, buildings. When you live in the city, you should look at all the materials that the city is made of. The road, the cement sidewalks, and all the other rock that you see. There's a lot of rocks and earth materials building our cities. And those are some of the most exciting and interesting earth materials and stories that I know. I hope you enjoyed this story about cement. Bye-bye.